Welcome back to the Journal of Samuel Kelly. Last time Samuel took charge of his own ship, the John, where he sailed to Barcelona, procuring salt for America. After arriving in America, most of his crew deserted the ship and forced Samuel to find a new crew, which was not easy work. When departing, the crew learned that the Spanish ships might be hostile, though Samuel did not encounter any conflicts on the way back to Great Britain. I hope you enjoy this episode from the Journal of Samuel Kelly. I was ordered to prepare the vessel for to take salt and coals in for Philadelphia. I shipped a new mate who appeared more calculated for industry than the one I had discharged, but he had little in his behavior to recommend him, being the son of a rough farmer from Lancashire Hills, and had served his apprenticeship in the West Indian trade from Lancaster. A few days after he commenced sleeping on board, in returning to the vessel from his supper, the press gang laid hold of him and lodged him in the rendezvous. I had retired to bed in my lodgings when a messenger from the mate obliged me to dress again, and I paid him a visit, but could not prevail on the officer to release him until the next day. As the seamen were now obliged to secret themselves from the press gang, I had many a weary step after them, but having obtained all but 2 of the crew, I sent the vessel into the river by way of securing those I had shipped. Towards the close of Sunday, I obtained a promise from 2 men at an alehouse of the lower order that they would go with me, but as they had not spent all their money, lately received from an African voyage, their landlord treated me with insult and endeavored to throw obstacles in the way to prevent their shipment. But having got on their right side, I was determined to keep close to them. The next day I hired a boat in readiness and paid them an early visit, but as seamen are a wavering set of people, I had to follow them from place to place during the forenoon, and at last, just at the top of high water, I was under the necessity of taking 2 women of their acquaintance into the boat with them, they little knowing that the vessel was at that moment under sail in the river. As soon as I got alongside, their chests were handed on board, and as the men entered the deck, the boat was ordered away, and we proceeded to sea. On the 12th, at 6 a.m., we were obliged to hand the topsails, and at 10 a.m. the wind blew so violent at west-southwest, with a heavy sea running, that we thought it prudent to reef the foresail. Accordingly, the mate and crew were on the yard at work, when a wave struck our vessel on her beam ends, and all the spars in the crutches with the quarter rail and some stanchions gave way, and buried me under the wreck. As the man at the helm had now no tiller rope to windward, he had been knocked away to leeward with the tiller, and I heard him groan. There was no one on deck but this man and me. But providentially the hen coop received the greatest weight of the spars, or else I might have been crushed to death. I was soon relieved from my disagreeable situation, and we set about the repairs as well as we could, not having a carpenter, but determined not to run to Liverpool again, as it was expected a hot press was going to take place, without any regard to protections. The gale continued in general the 13th and 14th, and the vessel was very leaky, with one of the pumps useless, it having burst, therefore was obliged to veer ship often to pump out the water. On the 15th, some of our seamen's hands had lost pieces of skin, and had wounds on their palms nearly as large as a 6pence. This arose from want of work whilst hiding so long from the press gang. About noon this day we ran for Ramsey Bay, and anchored in 10 fathoms, well sheltered. The 16th, the wind being moderate in the morning from the westward, we sailed, but the weather threatening caused us to return again. Towards night the wind blew strong at south-southeast. We got our topgallant mast on deck and gave the vessel about 2/3 of the cable. At midnight we were riding very uneasy, even pitching bows and bowsprit under water, and the spray of the sea flying the whole length of the vessel, wetting us completely. As there was great danger of our cable parting and the lives of the crew, humanly speaking, being in jeopardy, I made a proposal that in case of parting the cable, to run the vessel farther inshore, to get a little more shelter from the sea, and then let go the anchor, and should this also be lost, then to run her onshore on the beach. My mate thought it more advisable to run to the northward through a narrow channel in a dark night, without having any guide whatever to direct us, which being a most simple scheme was rejected by all. In an hour after, the wind veered on the point, which made the vessel ride easy, and we continued till the 19th, repairing our damage, and having put a plaster on the split part of the pump, it again became useful. We sailed this day with a westerly wind, which again veered to southwest. The 20th passed Holyhead. The 23rd had only reached Bardsey Island, the wind being contrary with rain. This night the moon was totally eclipsed. The 24th saw Arklow Mountain in Ireland. The 25th saw Strumblehead in Wales. The 26th passed Tusker with the wind at south-southeast and southeast. And on the 29th, got a good run to the westward. The wind got the northward, and in squalls blew very strong with rain at the same time. Across sea running, the vessel shipped much water. The 12th of November saw 2 men of war standing to the eastward, supposed them to be returning, as usual, from the Newfoundland station at this season of the year. The 30th of November we had only gained the longitude of 43 degrees 17 minutes west, though we had been now 50 days from Liverpool. I therefore thought it prudent for the whole crew, myself included, to submit to an allowance of bread in good time, and accordingly weighed each man 5 pounds to last the ensuing week, and then nailed fast the bread room. The 4th of December we saw many gulls and diving birds, which indicated that we were approaching near the Newfoundland bank. The 8th got soundings in 40 fathoms, pebbles with broken shells. The 9th we caught 6 codfish. They were remarkably lean, and had little in their maw bag but pebble stones. The 22nd the squalls were so violent that we took in all our low sails and laid to under 3 hammocks, spread on the main shrouds, the sea running mountains high and very long. The 23rd the wind was like a hurricane from the westward, and whilst laying to at 1 p.m., a heavy wave fell on board before the larboard gangway, which washed our boats out of the chocks, and stove the longboat, burst in the steerage hatchway, crushed the hen coops in pieces, broke the cabin skylight, and finally carried away our lee quarter boards, but providentially swept no men overboard, they having secured themselves. We immediately set all to work, and lashed the boats to the scuppers and nailed some canvas over the hatchway. The vessel now laying in the trough of the sea every minute, we expected she would founder, the waves being as high as our mastheads. At 2 p.m., loosed the foresail and veered round on the other tack. As the rail, or rough tree, was broken, we got in the spritsail yard to replace it. At 8 a.m., the wind being moderate, we got the boats again in the chocks. The 24th we found more damage done by the sea, viz., the gallows stanchion was broken, the main spring stay was stranded, and other things much injured, which we were now employed in repairing. On the 11th of January, 1791, being then in the longitude of 68 degrees 8 minutes west, I thought it prudent to make a farther reduction in the allowance of bread to 4 pounds per man for a week. We had now been 92 days from Liverpool, and still no appearance of a fair wind, or any continued moderate weather. On the 15th we found our vessel getting more leaky. The 16th we caught a pilot fish, the companion of a shark. The 18th of January I reduced the weekly allowance of bread to 3 pounds for each man, with a pound of beef per day. The 20th we saw some wreck of a vessel. The 23rd we had rough weather, and the sea full grown, our vessel laying to. About midday a sea struck the vessel fore and aft her whole length, which shattered the channel bends, broke the remaining rough tree and its stanchions, threw the boats again across the deck, and stove the longboat a second time, split the covering board of the gunwale, broke the larboard gallows stanchion and 2 stanchions on the quarterdeck, and opened several seams so that I had to fix canvas spouts to lead the water across my bed from the side. I was in great anxiety respecting our stored salt cargo, for if the water had got to it, it would have melted and the vessel would have overset. We got some benefit even out of this disaster, viz. The broken timber to cook our victuals in the cabin, being almost without firing, and at night, when we were not laying to, we steered by the stars. The few candles remaining I preserved for coming in with the land. Whilst we were repairing our damage, the gale mercifully abated, and the sea mountains began to subside. We again lashed our boats to the scuppers, where they remained fastened across the deck. The 25th, seeing streams of weeds, straw reed, etc., northeast and southwest, I concluded we were verging on the Gulf Stream, originating in the Bay of Mexico, from the easterly trade winds continually pressing a large body of water into the Gulf. This day I reduced the weekly allowance of bread to 3 pounds. As I had been accustomed to scent the pine trees when drawing near the American coast, with the wind from the land, I was now confident of our near approach to the continent. On the 30th, when I retired to rest, I gave particular orders about heaving the lead without stopping the vessel's progress. At midnight, tried for soundings in 40 fathoms of line without effect. At 2 a.m., threw the lead again, which when hauled in, the officer applied the tallow to his tongue to feel for sand but found none. One of the men also tried the tallow and found sand on one edge of the grease, which occasioned a further trial which proved we were in 17 fathoms, coarse sand, and I have little need to say that this discovery gave us infinite satisfaction, though our troubles were not yet over. I knew by the intense cold we had experienced just before, and from the opinion of the Americans we had spoken to, that the Delaware was closed with the ice. Therefore, according to orders, I kept the vessel northeast before a heavy sea running, to try for New York, and got our cables bent. At daylight we saw a number of wildfowl. The 31st of January, 1791, the wind flew round from southwest to north-northeast, and blew strong, so that we were obliged again to take in our sails and lay to. The vessel shipping much water which turned to ice on our deck and cordage, and we had much snow and sleet. At 4 a.m. sounded in 40 fathoms, and were afterwards driven off soundings. The 1st of February we had a strong cold gale with a heavy sea, but towards noon, being more moderate, we set our foresails and topsails. The 2nd, we were obliged to take in our topsails, and the vessel was plunging bow under in the turbulent sea, the wind being squally with dark clouds and snow. The 3rd, we recovered the soundings, the wind being northerly and so cold that our deck was covered with ice. The 4th, we had a southerly wind which enabled us to stand to the northward, and I do not think I was off the deck more than 10 minutes all this day, so eager was I to spread and reduce the sails as occasion required. The 5th, we had strong gales with cold rain. At 11 a.m., the long-looked-for land appeared in view. It was Long Island, and, being in 15 fathoms, we stood to the westward. At noon, saw the high land of Neversink on the Jersey shore. At 3 o'clock, we saw the lighthouse on Sandy Hook, but no pilot appearing, I was determined to push the vessel in, as the wind was now blowing strong from the eastward. Having calculated the time of tide from H. Moore's Practical Navigator, I made for the Hook, under a supposition that it was now a quarter flood. But on getting into shoal water, I found so much sea as to alarm me, it being occasioned by the ebb tide running against the wind, the book being erroneous as much as 4 hours in the time of high water, and from which error I had nearly lost the vessel. We immediately hauled on a wind, and soon had the satisfaction of discovering a fast-sailing pilot boat coming round the Hook, which quickly came alongside and confirmed me that it was now the last quarter ebb. When the tide made, we ran in and anchored 2 miles above the Hook. The wind was now at northwest, and our sails and rigging covered with ice. On Sunday, the 6th of February, 1791, at 7 in the morning we got under sail, all hands being now at full allowance of provisions and in high spirits. We got up the topgallant yard and set studding sails both sides for a wonder. At 11 got through the Narrows, but as the wind was light when above Staten Island, and ice coming down on us in a large field, though broken, we were obliged to drop our anchor to prevent being driven away with it. I went below for something and was astonished at the noise it made against the bottom. In about an hour after, a breeze springing up, we lifted our anchor and at 5 in the afternoon moored at the wharf below Beckman's Slip in the East River, New York, after a passage of 119 days, or 17 weeks, the marine grass growing on our sides as high as the gunwale. On this passage I entered with a full determination to persevere, through storms of wind, hail, rain, and snow. Sometimes I had the satisfaction of seeing a weather-beaten bark pursuing the same route, but they sailing faster and not being so low in the water, all left me in the rear. As we seldom had a moderate day, the sea generally ran high, so that we could not lay our side to it for fear of being swamped. 8 days following, we were obliged to lay to, and during the passage we were laying to on 48 days. We melted ice to supply our drink, and as we were often unable to cook on deck, a small quantity of salt provisions was boiled in the cabin, till the coals got nearly expended, when we were obliged to nurse our firing. Many a long, dark, melancholy winter's night I passed in the cabin, and believe I never went to bed but once during the passage wholly undressed. Sometimes my bed was so wet that I had to coil myself round like a dog on one corner of it. But notwithstanding these disagreeables, I continued firm in my resolution not to run to the southward. On our approaching the American continent, vessels leaving the land endeavored to avoid us, supposing we were in want of provisions, and one in particular I hailed till I was hoarse without getting a satisfactory answer, she making off from us as fast as possible. During 14 dark, dreary weeks of winter, my views were bound by the alternate succession of growing hills and bursting billows with hail and sleet and snow. When retired at night, no ruddy fire nor beaming candle cheered the dismal gloom, but in gross darkness soothed to sleep by whistling winds and roaring seas. The long, dark hours were spent in deep solemnity, save when the seaman tuned his ballads of past-fought battles or the Chick Lane ghost. I think, notwithstanding my allowance was the same as the men, I had on our arrival nearly 6 pounds of biscuits in my bag, and our remaining stock was about 190 pounds, so that we could have reached the Caribbee Islands had we been ultimately blown off the coast and obliged to run for them as vessels frequently do in the winter. My hair was such a length about my face that my old acquaintances could not help remarking the great alteration in my appearance. Our cargo was soon disposed of, but when we opened the hatchway, instead of the salt touching the hatches as when we sailed, it had been so shaken on the passage that it had shrunk greatly into a solid mass, so as to require iron instruments to reduce it to its original grain. On my arrival here, I gave thanks to my almighty preserver at the Episcopal Church of St. George, where I heard Bishop Seabury preach. Captain M., who traded between Philadelphia and Jamaica, was now loading here, and gave me a particular and general invitation to his wife's mother to spend my evenings. At this house I found a number of respectable and well-behaved females, who treated me with great hospitality. My consignee was an Englishman, at whose table a plate was always ready. This gentleman was fond of hunting and fowling, and I was informed that in shooting 18 times he killed 17 grouse. He was such an excellent marksman. He had an English hunting horse, which he was inclined to try in a sledge on the snow, though the animal was restive. However, I agreed to accompany him, and we were well pelted with snow and dirt from the horse's heels during our excursion. When the thaw took place, the streets in some places were impassable, and I was informed that a dirty sailor, seeing a well-dressed lady stopped by the water, without any ceremony lifted her up, and wading to the opposite side landed her safely. But instead of being thanked for his civility, she told him he was an impudent fellow. On hearing this, he again caught her up, saying, "As you are not pleased, I'll take you back again," and accordingly carried her to the place where he first found her. On Sabbath days during my stay here, I generally attended worship at the Dutch Reformed Church, the service being in English. The ladies in general, after being seated in their pews, received from their servants small stoves to warm their feet. They were square wooden boxes with holes on the top and an iron handle to hold it by. At the side was a slide to open for putting in the fire in a small earthen or iron cup, and to prevent smoke, the live coals from a wood fire were generally used. A lady in the seat with me was so civil as to push her stove towards me, but not being accustomed to such indulgence, I immediately returned it. These stoves are also used during the severity of the winter by the females in their dwelling, each person having one. I think these machines would be very serviceable in the cold, damp churches in England, especially to delicate people who often injure their constitutions by going from a warm, carpeted parlor to sit for hours together in a church with a wet running from the walls and pillars. In this city, I became acquainted with a merchant of Kingston, Jamaica, who was just arrived in this city from Canada by a route across the frozen lakes, and part of the way I believe the sledge was drawn by dogs, trained to draw like horses. Our vessel being now laden with oak timber, ashes, staves, etc., we prepared for sea. I procured one passenger for England, but he beat me down to 10 pounds, out of which 5 guineas went to the ship owners. But he was to lay in a sufficient sea store of necessaries. Before I sailed, I heard of the loss of an American brig at Egg Harbor, having been 22 weeks on her passage from Liverpool, and at last was either ran or drove on shore on the coast. The crew were reduced to 3 potatoes per diem. Whatever our troubles had been, we now found they were light when compared with the crew of this vessel. On the 20th of March, 1791, we made sail in company with my friend Captain M. for Jamaica, and the new success for Grenada, the wind being strong with much snow. On turning out Mr. S.'s stores from the hampers, to my surprise, instead of finding a good stock of tea, sugar, wine, beer, hams, etc., I found large quantities of turnips, which he had provided as an antiscorbutic. But whatever effect this root might have on the scurvy, I found it inefficacious for curing the itch, as Mr. S. was well covered with this disease. Amongst the hampers taken on board, I found one containing excellent porter, which the merchant had sent for my use. The Paragon Snow, loaded with wheat, had sailed for Liverpool a day or two before us. The 22nd, the gale was so strong at southwest, we were obliged to lay to. The 25th, we had very stormy weather, the sun having a large ring round it by day, and the moon was also encircled at night. We had mostly bad weather till the 1st of April, on which day, when laying to, a heavy sea struck us and broke the starboard quarterboards. Having been for several days in the Gulf Stream, the heavy waves ran cross, which caused the vessel to be deluged with water, the wind being contrary from the eastward. From the 7th to the 11th, we saw numerous wild ducks and such birds as frequent the banks of Newfoundland. My passenger was now rubbing to eradicate the itch, I having supplied him with mercurial ointment from my own medicine chest. Since our leaving the land, I had confined him to one set of utensils, which he was to keep clean, himself to prevent the cabin boy from catching the disease. The 24th, running in the latitude of 50 degrees 50 minutes north, we got soundings in 98 fathoms, fine brown sand, and had been exactly 5 weeks from New York. The 25th sounded in the different depths of 73, 65, and 64 fathoms, and then saw the Irish land. The 26th, a foul wind blowing strong, occasioned the vessel to plunge the forecastle under water. We did not pass Tusker till the 29th. The 30th, we saw Holyhead and continued beating against a strong gale till the 5th of May, the head being in sight 6 days. This day the wind shifted in the morning from the eastward to the southward, and we got a Liverpool pilot out of the boat number 5. About noon we anchored near the northeast buoy on Hale Bank. We had been 46 days from New York, one half of which we had been mostly beating against an easterly wind. On looking into my liquor case, expecting to find nearly a gallon of cherry brandy there, which I had purchased at New York, I was much surprised to find but little left, and questioning the boy, was informed that the passenger had drank it from time to time when I was engaged on deck. This was a great mortification. After the ebb tide had made 2 or 3 hours, a number of my friends came on board from Liverpool. Mr. 1010's late wife's father was a shipmaster and had arrived from a voyage and anchored to stop tide near the spot where our vessel now lay. Many of his friends from Liverpool had come on board to congratulate him on his safe arrival, as my acquaintances had now done. A gale of wind came on, the vessel was wrecked, and I believe the whole on board were drowned. I learned from a friend that one of the underwriters had been so alarmed with our long passage out that he had reinsured at 20%, though he was only to receive 2.5 for his risk from the owners. Having now entered the river in safety, we anchored before the town, and the next morning ran into George's dock. I found the Paragon was not arrived, though she sailed before us. I was not sorry for this, as the master was a nonsuch in his own estimation, and the disappointment might tend to lessen his pride, which was at all times insufferable. I hope you enjoyed this episode from the Journal of Samuel Kelly. Please like, subscribe, and follow on whatever platform you're listening. Be sure to check out the description to find out ways you can support this project and others, and tune in next time for more from the Journal of Samuel Kelly.